Hi, Lindley. Oh, wait.
Hi, Amanda. How are you?
Much better than yesterday.
Yes.
I realized that, last week when I said that it was after having a session, then the next day I became very tired.
Yes.
Actually, when I look, I look at my calendar and I wrote in my table calendar that on January the 12th, very tired. And that seems to be 1 week after my third dose of Sinovac.
Yes.
Yeah, so that means I became very tired for 2 weeks.
Not unusual.
Hi, Cecile.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, not unusual at all.
The injection itself was painless, had no ache, and then the exercise physiologist was saying, if you don't have any fever or what, you can do any high intensity thing. I said, but I didn't do.
Good.
But 1 week later, then became like.
Yeah. And by the way, knowing what I know about you and your heart and other things like this, I'm really glad that you did not listen to your exercise physiologist, because I'm very happy that you didn't do any high intensity workouts. That would have just been potentially putting the risk a little bit too much. Even for me, I waited for an entire week before I had my heart rate above 120. Yeah. I was very concerned.
Hi, Darren.
Hi, Darren. Good evening. He says, good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone.
Woohoo. All right, I don't know how many of our participants are actually coming live tonight, so we'll probably get started because yeah, it's a touch and go. We do actually have quite a few number of registrations, so that's really fantastic. We really appreciate everybody registering, and again, I'm very happy to see that we have lots of new people in our registrations, so that's also really fabulous. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody who is new. And I also realized when I'm doing the recording, as I do the slides in this particular way, the only thing that actually gets recorded is the slide itself. So nobody's faces ever actually shows up, including mine, which I think is really interesting. Anyway, so nobody actually has to worry about their face being on recording, because when I looked at the last video, it doesn't record any of us. So, okay, never mind. Anyway, so life changes with neuro linguistic programming. So we have been on this little journey. And the cool thing about this journey is that like with all journeys, they have a beginning and of course they have an end. So this is our part 3, our end of our journey of life changes with NLP. So in this session, we are putting it all together. We are putting all of the pieces to the puzzle of making life changes with neuro linguistic program, but just making them in general and being able to understand maybe a better way of going about changing things in our lives. Now, when we are doing this, we would like to also, of course, review what we have learned thus far. And in our previous 2 sessions, we have talked about why change is so important, because, of course, nothing really stays stagnant, and we are not those type of people who are going to just sit and do nothing. So we are going, hi Cammy. So we are going to change, and change is inevitable in people's lives. And so we want to be able to understand how to work with the changes, not only when they happen to us or in our environment, but also when we are trying to instigate that change. And this is what these sessions are really about, is when we're trying to instigate change in our lives, how do we go about it in the best way possible? Now, we also looked in our previous sessions about the different types of change. And we looked at everything from remedial and incremental changes to generative, evolutionary, and revolutionary changes. So there are different levels of change that we can make. And we understand that depending on what specifically we are changing in our lives, depends on the level that we are actually going to achieve. So our revolutionary change is really about our mission and our purpose. Our evolutionary change is really about who we are as a person. And our generative change, really about our beliefs and values and our capabilities, really expanding ourselves into something that is new. Now, this is the kind of change techniques that we are looking at from a neuro linguistic programming perspective. We do sometimes look at things like remedial and incremental change, like constant and never-ending improvement. But really, from an NLP perspective, we really want to work more at a generative change, an evolutionary change, a revolutionary change, because those are the things that create deep transformation in people's lives. And that's kind of what we're all about. So we also explored what mental programs were and how we created our mental programs, all of this information coming from outside of us and that we receive from our visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory senses that brings that information into ourselves. And our brain has an ability to delete and distort and generalize this information. Now, we also know that does that all throughout our lives, through every experience of our lives. And it creates a specific type of way that it does it, a specific way that it programs us. And you might call them filters or programs, or however you want to refer to it as. It's just that there are certain information that's coming to us, and we are sort of filtering it out in the way that our experience has led us to do so. And it's very different for each person. And so this is why two people with very similar personalities can have two very different life experiences, because of the mental kinds of changes that are going on, the mental filters that are going on in their minds. So you could have two people who have the same MBTI score or some personality score, and they seem totally different kinds of people. I remember when I was hired by one of the executives in Singapore, and he wanted me to complete an Enneagram test. And it was the first time that I had ever taken an Enneagram. And when I completed it, I forwarded him my results, and he said, "There's no possible way that you are this score." and I thought to myself, this is interesting. So he actually had me do a in-person questionnaire that he himself gave me before he hired me. And sure enough, he found out that I was the score that I was, which was an 8, a challenger. And he says, "I'm an 8 and a challenger, and you are completely different than I am." And there's a reason for those things, because I have a different set of mental maps. I have a different way of programming myself. Even though our personalities are quite the same, we have different ways of going about that same kind of personality. So that's how we got to mental maps. And then we learned that, of course, we have all of these mental maps that help us to create change. And there are some specific ones that we need to do, and we need to utilize, and we need to utilize in order. So this is what this is all about. We want to try to understand, how do we put these things into order to be able to get to the place that we want to get to. So these are all of the different ones that we looked at. So our motivation, our decision, our integration, our creation. These are all of the mental maps that we looked at before. So what we want to do is put them in a step-by-step order, basically, so that we all understand how that we can create a change process for ourselves, irrespective of where it is in our lives. Now, to be able to begin this, we have to actually start with a very small and very menial presence of NLP. This entire concept of present state and desired state. So our present state, and when our present state does not equal our desired state, that means there is a time for change in our lives. So it is only at this point in time when we are sitting in a world of our present state, and when we have something that isn't going right, that isn't working, that it isn't happening in our lives the way we want it to, this is where we are going to have this kind of disconnect, this present state not equaling our desired state. We are not where we want to be. And this could be in various places in our lives. It can be in our relationships. For example, we could have resentment in a relationship. We could have things like not meeting the right person in our life to create a life connection with. We could have family issues that have happened through our past. We could have any kinds of relationship issues with friends or family members. And so these kinds of things can happen. We could also have disconnect with our present state and our desired state in the area of our wealth or a career. So we might not be getting the money that we want to earn from our work. We might not have been able to find the kind of work that we want. We might not have been able to get that promotion that we want to get, or to have saved enough money for the lifestyle that we want to live. So all of these kinds of things are this discord in our bodies and our minds of the fact that we aren't where we want to be. Our present state doesn't equal our desired state. And then we also could have these things in the area of our health. So things like overcoming diseases. So like one of my clients just got diagnosed with Parkinson's, and that's quite a change. So, he might have been going along where his present state and his desired state were perfectly happy together. And then all of a sudden he has a diagnosis like Parkinson's. And now all of a sudden his present state and his desired state are not equal. They're in discord with each other. And so now he must go about understanding what new direction he has and how to manage the disease that he has now. Other people might have things with getting fit or losing weight. So these are the common kind of things that people talk about with health, whether it's getting away from disease or getting towards something that is more health related. So for me, I think everybody now knows that one of the things that I get away from is trying to get away from something like Alzheimer's or cancer. And so I do a lot in my life with regards to that and trying to get away from those things. So that's what we're going to start with. And that's what all of NLP starts with as far as our coaching, our working with something, is where we are from our present state into our desired state. That means if it doesn't equal, that's exactly what we are. We are in a place where we need to have some sort of change, which is great because that's what we're talking about. Now, we go from that to, okay, yes. Now I'm on the right place. Okay, so we go from that and we go to our step 2. So our step 1, of course, is we have a present state that doesn't equal our desired state. And we go to our next step, which we learned about our mental programs, about motivation. We need to actually be motivated to change it. Awareness that we need to change is one thing, but a motivation to actually do something about it is completely something different. So we learned already that this mental program is about whether we are going to go away from something that is painful, like the stick, or going towards something that is pleasurable, like the carrot. Now, for some people, carrots might not be so pleasurable, but for me, they are. So going towards something that is pleasurable, going towards a goal, a dream, a vision, or going away from something that causes pain, like debt or like disease or like bad relationships. So those are the kinds of things that we might be going away from. Now, we also had learned that there were a lot of questions that we could ask ourselves with regards to this kind of exploration about our motivation. Now, one of the things that I do with my clients is I take them on a looking back exploration. So really looking at their present state and where they have come from thus far. So this might be looking back in a year or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or even longer, like their entire lifetime, and deciding what were those things in their life that were really stood out as being not so great. So really the bad things that have occurred in somebody's life, and really bringing our awareness and our conscious attention to those things. And people often ask me when I do this, what causes you to start by looking at all of the negative things? And this is because we understand now that motivation sometimes occurs when people need to get away from something. And by bringing out and remembering and bringing awareness to the pain that has occurred in somebody's life really motivates them to change it and to do something about it. So I always start with having somebody to review what has happened in the past that has been painful. And so the other thing that I might want to do with them during that process is to ask them, what did they learn from those experiences? So even though those things were painful, what might they have learned from them? What was the lesson or the takeaway that they got from that? Now, the other thing that I'm going to do is also have them look back, but this time look back at all of the things that were really motivating to them in a positive way. So things that they achieved, accomplishments, things that they had that were abundant, things that they're grateful for, things that occurred that were surprising or joyful. And so these are the things that I'm going to be doing with a client so that they can also understand what they might be going towards in the future. Now, of course, I'm also going to ask them, what lesson did they learn from all of those achievements, all of those goals that they had set and achieved, all of the things that they were grateful for, because there are lessons there too. And again, this really helps me to establish with a client what their away from motivations are and their towards motivations are. So that's really important to me from that motivation. Now, we also had learned about all of those questions that we had in the first two videos, or specifically in the first video, because that's where those questions were. And so we could also go back to those questions too. Now, next, one of the things that we also mentioned just very briefly, but I would like to re-mention it here and take it a little bit deeper, is the fact that we also need to look at our beliefs and our meanings, the things that we presume to be true, presuppositions, the things that we presume to be true about our current state, or even the state of where we want to go, the desired place that we want to go. We need to actually explore our belief systems about those kinds of things, because sometimes it's our beliefs that are holding us back. Sometimes we might believe that change is going to be hard, or change is going to be impossible, or change isn't going to be quick, or it's not going to be easy. So these are the things that are our belief systems in our mind. And we might be just sitting there and sort of taking a crystal ball out and looking at it as if it were the future. But really, we don't really have a crystal ball. And so we might be anticipating that something might be bad about our change process. And it really might not be bad after all. So it's really important for us to explore our beliefs and what is true about what we are creating. Now, we could do this in lots of different ways. We could do something like a belief audit with an NLP practitioner, or we could just look at our beliefs about what we are wanting to do. So if we have a goal, we have a desired state we want to get to, a thing that we want to change, we can ask ourselves, what do I believe about that? Or what is important to me about that? And we can look for things that we are that are coming up that might be a bit negative. And so sometimes those things just pop up, and it might be something like a restriction or a thought that we are not good enough, or we don't deserve it, or that we aren't capable of doing it. So we might be questioning our skill sets. And so we might be doing those kinds of things in in our process to try to change. And so what we need to do is kind of investigate that a little bit and kind of really go and find out if it's really actually true, our belief system. Or sometimes, as we find in NLP, that belief system we find has been given to us by other people in our lives. So today I was working with someone about a process in NLP that we have that's called transforming troublesome voices. And it's about that negative voice that you have inside your head. And this is a really great exercise that we do in NLP, because what we're trying to do originally with that exercise is to find out who that voice actually is. It's not really your voice. You learn to talk like that from somebody else somewhere in your life. And that's what we do this exercise for, is we find out who that voice is and how you learned to speak like that from that person. And then we learn and expand our perspective about that person, what was going on in their lives. But the most important part of the transforming troublesome voices exercise is doing that exercise to be able to create that change in that negative voice. And so what we want to be able to do is to transform that voice into somebody that we actually, the voice of somebody we actually care about, somebody we would actually listen to and believe. And so when we transform that voice into somebody we care about and we believe, we also create potentially a new way of talking to ourselves. And that's exactly what we were doing today. And so this is another way for us to be able to change our belief system by really looking at where that belief comes from. So in one of my courses that I do, I talk about my father had a belief about you have to spend money to make money. And he had this belief, and I grew up with this belief, you had to spend money to make money. And as I grew up with this belief system, it was very interesting that it took me a very long period of time for me to understand that my father sort of left a couple of things out of that belief system that he taught me. Because I was going along my life just spending money and spending money and spending money because, you have to spend money to make money. And it sort of never dawned on me that I wasn't actually making the amount of money that I was spending. And so it was like, where did this equation go wrong? Because I swore I heard it correctly from my father. And so it was really interesting because I put it in my book, and my father read my book and he laughed because of the fact that in his interpretation of it was an entirely different meaning than what I had interpreted from. And obviously it was, the entire thing about it is that for him, it was, you need to spend money, you need to take risk to be able to make money. And for me, it was just, you spend money to make money. And so the calculation of the fact that you actually have to make the money back never came into the equation. And that was just assumed in his world, that was part of the equation. And so it was a really interesting part of a belief system that I grew up with that was fun to explore and to bring awareness to. Okay. So beliefs and understanding what we presume to be true, our presuppositions about life and what our changes. But not only do we have to do that about about what we want to change, but about change itself. So as I said, we could think about change as being hard or difficult, or we could think about change as being easy or effortless. And we need to understand what our beliefs about a change process is before we actually tackle that change process, because it could be the belief system about the change that stops us, not about the place that we want to go or the goal that we're trying to achieve or the change that we're trying to make, but just the belief about the actual change process that could stop us. So it's really important for us to look at that as well. Okay, now going on, we also want to look at our third mental program that we looked at, which was all about decisions. And so in this, we learned in part 2 about decision making and how we wanted to focus on reflection and action. So for some of us, we reflect more and act a little bit later, or sometimes we don't act, and that's inaction. but the reflection comes first. And for some of us, we have a tendency to do it the other way, where we act quite quickly and then we reflect later because sometimes it didn't go as exactly as we planned. So what we want to make sure of is that we are balancing out our own program. So just like when we were talking about motivation, we might have a tendency to be more motivated towards staying away from pain than going towards pleasure. And we might be more motivated to go towards pleasure and not so much going away from pain. It's important, though, that we explore both. So just like in decisions, we need to explore both the reflection side, where we're looking at what is the dream, what really is the dream of the change that we want to have to happen, as well as the action, as in what action would we actually take if we were to make the change. We haven't made the change yet, but what action could we take to make the change? Okay, and so those are both things. So the action-oriented people will just want to go out and act without reflecting. So we want to pull those people back a little bit and say, wait. So let's think this through. And those people who are reflecting without actually thinking about what action they're going to take, then we need to kind of put in some place about things that we are going to take action on. Now, we want to actually do this in a couple of different ways from an NLP perspective. So one of the ways that we do this is making sure that we are in a dream state. And so when we're reflecting, when we really want to reflect, we want to make sure that we're in a state that gives us possibility, that anything is possible and we can achieve something. So this is the dream state of all about what. What do we want the change to be? And what could it be in its abundance, right? The dream of it. And so most people get caught up in how they're going to do it. And this is not what we're doing in reflection. In reflection, we're not thinking about how, because that's the next part. In reflection, we just want to make the dream the dream. So there are a couple of ways that we could do this that really helps us to be able to get there. And one is to use a dreaming state, like what we would use in the Disney planning process. And the other one is to use something that we refer to in NLP as the as-if frame. And the as-if frame is really stepping in as if the change has already occurred. Now, the key to this is to be able to do this other thing, which is called VAK. And the VAK is, what does it look like for us when the change has occurred? I mean, what behaviors do we see ourselves doing when we have changed? What environment are we in when we have made that change? What interactions do we have with other people when we have made that change? What all is going around us in that state? when we have already made that change, as if we have already made that change. And then what does it sound like? And what I mean by that is, what do people say to us when the change has already occurred? It might be our friends, it might be our family members, it might be our spouse, it might be our boyfriend or girlfriend. But what is it that other people are going to be saying to us? And then what are we going to be saying to ourselves and other people, as if the change has already occurred? So when we're imagining that dream state, when we're imagining that change already happening, what do we hear? What kind of things do we hear in our environment? What from all of the people that are around us, plus from ourselves? And then how do we feel? Our kinesthetic sense. So when we're really in that change process and we have already achieved what we want to achieve, we've already made those changes as if we have already made them, then what does it feel like? And do we feel a sense of pride? Do we feel a sense of accomplishment? Do we feel a sense of lightness? Do we feel lighter? Do we feel heavier? Do we feel richer? Do we feel, what is it? Do we feel more connected? Do we feel healthier? Do we feel free? These are kinds of the things that we want to look at from an as if perspective. And this is the important part of the reflection. So from an NLP perspective, we do this particular process when we look at a well-formed outcome. So any coach from an NLP perspective will be taking a person through a well-formed outcome. So we will be talking about the change that you want to make and what does it look like and sound like and feel like, because this is what starts our evidence process. The evidence of how do we know that we have achieved our desired state? How do we know that our PS equals our DS, right? So this is part of that process. And we're just at, as a reminder, at that aspect of making the decision. So we haven't taken any action yet. We're just still reflecting. And we're reflecting, as it said, like in the as if, what would we be doing to have that change occur? What action would we be doing? And so we're thinking about the action, but we're not actually taking the action just yet. Okay, so this is a really important step that a lot of people who are action oriented miss. And because they're so action oriented and they miss this step, sometimes their change is not actually fully realized. And so we want to make sure that if we're working with ourselves on the change process, we want to be able to cover both sides, not just the reflection, but the action, and not just the action, the reflection first. Okay. All right. So let's look at our next one, which was our mental program of creation. And so this is when we start getting into the how. So we're looking at how exactly do we go about getting our change to occur. So this is when we're going to pull out our reality strategy, what we would refer to in NLP as a TOTE, how we test, operate, test, and exit. So our test is because our present state does not equal our desired state, and that's our first test. And then we operate, i.e. we take action. So this is the part, our creation is where we take our action and we start actually acting. And we're taking our action in a couple of different ways. We're taking our action from an internal place. So our internal state, our way of framing our minds, our mental program of our internal state, and our external state, our external frames. And so what we want to look at is both of those when we're creating change and we're creating action to change. So what we would need to do is be able to create a step-by-step procedure basically for ourselves to get to where we're going for our change process. Because in the next section, as you'll see, we would also need to have the measurements to make sure that we are measuring the results that we have, whether we're getting closer or further away from the actual change that we want to occur. And so for this particular place, though, we're just working on the actual how. How do we get there? So from an internal place, what we're looking at is our internal states, are the way of our being and how we actually do us. So what kind of state do we need to be in to make that change? How do we switch states when we're not in an actual state that we need to be in? So we might be using a technique in NLP called anchoring to be able to do a state change. Or we might be able to look at something like doing a, we might be able to look at doing something like just a reframe technique to be able to put ourselves into a positive state. And then we also want to look at our external frames. So the rules and guidelines that we look at from an internal place and the rules and guidelines we look at from an external place. So from an internal place, it might be something like when I do my Japanese work and my Japanese work, I want to make sure that from an internal perspective that I am having the correct tone in my voice, that I am practicing in a way that's diligent. So for me, that's repeating things out loud. That's for me repeating things if I don't think I've gotten the tone correct. It's for me repeating the mistakes that I've made and repeating them over and over to make sure that I can get them correct. Being able to read properly the symbols of the Japanese language and things like that. So it's that internal place. But then from an external place, I also need to actually look at how am I doing, how am I creating my strategy from an external side? So do I need to work with an external coach? Do I need to have some variable on the outside of me to be able to help me to get to where I'm going in my change process? So we both want to understand our internal frame of our own success, as well as our external frame of how somebody else outside of us can help us. And that might be something as simple as a movie or a book or a coach or a friend or a family member or something like that. So we have both internal and external checks to the strategy of the how we are going about our action plan. And so this, again, a step-by-step process, a reality process for a strategic plan for our change process. Now, what we know about in NLP is that our next area that we looked at from our mental programs that help us to create change is this integration aspect. And the integration aspect is all about being able to understand how our capabilities are creating our behavior. Okay, so basically what we're trying to do is say, I need a new set of skills. I need a new set of a way of doing things and a way of creating things in my life so that I can create those things in such a way and in such a repetition that they become an unconscious behavior. And so our capabilities, a new skill set, a new something, we integrate as a way of being inside of us. And that's what integration is all about. So what we're looking at here is our measurements of how we look at our strategy and how successful our strategy is. Are we having success that is similar to the guidelines that we set out to ourselves? So is the change that is occurring similar to the change that we wanted, or is it different? And so what we want to be able to do is notice both the differences and the similarities, and where are we going with our change process as we take action to our change process. And here's the most important part of this is the word noticing. Because when people start to measure themselves, they might be extremely judgmental about measuring themselves in a change process. And so, for example, let's look at the 3 areas that we looked at before. In relationships, if you were trying to make a change in a relationship and you had a disagreement with somebody that you were trying to change a relationship with, you might judge yourself or the other person as it's not working. The change isn't working, the relationship isn't working, or whatever it is. And you might judge that as a failure or a setback or it not going in the direction you want to go. So we find that that's a difference and we notice it's a difference. So instead of judging ourselves, we just say, okay, that's not getting us to where we want to go with this relationship. So now we need to go back and we need to look at what is the dream? What do we want to do? And recreate a different action plan so that we can try something else. So in NLP, we call this guessing and testing. So we guess that this new strategy is going to work and we go and test it. And then we notice whether we get closer to our goal or we get further away. If we get further away, we're going to guess again. And if we get closer, then the guess was correct in the first place. Okay. So the thing about a lot of people is that once they come across something that puts them as a setback, then they stop measuring themselves or they judge themselves and then they stop the process of change altogether. So this often happens most often for me and when I work with people is in the area of health. So for example, somebody's trying to lose weight or trying to get healthier and they go to the gym and they're very adamant of going to the gym and they're doing a really good job of going to the gym. And then all of a sudden some things happen at work, some things happen at home. And so they don't go to the gym so often or so much as far as time goes. And so they start judging that the goal potentially might not be worth it. So instead of cycling back to what is the dream and what could be a new strategy to create to the dream, then they don't do that process. They sort of give up because the results that they're getting is not equating to the change that they want to see. And so they look at that as more of a failure rather than as just feedback. So we don't want to look at things as just failures. So I'm going to give you a personal example. So one of the things that I've been doing recently is I have this app and it's called a chronometer. And what the chronometer does is that you enter all of the things that you eat onto the chronometer. And so it does require you to weigh a lot of things, which is sort of annoying, but it's fun. So you weigh things and you put all of the things that you eat in a day, and it kind of tells you all of your vitamin and mineral that you have consumed in a day. And it tells you how much calories you've consumed, as well as how much fat you've consumed, and fiber, and protein, and carbohydrates, and all these other things, right? And so what it does is actually give you a really realistic view of where you are and what you're eating. And so for somebody who's trying to lose weight, it's a really cool thing to do because once you calculate it, it tells you, well, if you're trying to lose weight, you're 500 calories over what you've actually done today. So your metabolic burn of how much you're going to burn on a day, because this is how old you are, and this is how tall you are, and this is how much you weigh. And so your metabolic rate will be this. It's based on an algorithm. So that's great. And if you've done exercise, you can calculate, or you can put that exercise into that chronometer app as well. And so it gives you a very clear indication of where you are. And it's just data, right? It's just a bunch of numbers. So some people can look at these numbers and they can get really sad about themselves or get really frustrated and really upset about it. Some people don't even look at this kind of stuff because of the fact that it's easier to stay ignorant to the actual fact of what's going on when they eat stuff. And so for me, it was a really interesting way to notice what I'm eating, and notice, for me, it was more about like vitamin and mineral content, and seeing what my fat percentage was for the day, and seeing exactly how much caloric intake I have. And that was very fascinating for me because I had never seen that before. Now, I don't do that on a daily basis every single day of every single week, but I do it as a way each week as a way for me to refresh my understanding of what exactly it is that I'm consuming. Because sometimes I have a tendency to consume things in a very linear fashion. Like, I really like certain things, and I have a tendency to eat those certain things quite a bit. And so it was a really good snapshot for me. And so when I look at my overall health goals, it was a way for me to measure my direction, my ability for me to get my integration of my capabilities, of expanding my skill set to use this app, and to look at it and measure the things that I'm doing in a different way than I had done before, without getting consumed with judging myself for example, like going over in my energy consumption because I had 2 glasses of wine instead of 1, or something like this, right? So it's a way of doing that. And so these kinds of ways of measurement, like a scale, or your bank balance, or the number of arguments you have with somebody. These are all of things that we could use as a measurement tool. And it's just a measurement tool that says you're either getting further away from your goal or your change process, or you're getting closer to it. And that's all it is. All we want to do is just notice, when we take action, are we getting closer or further away? Now, I was listening to a really great podcast today, and the guy in the podcast said, all I want people to do is to aim for a B+. And so we have, in America, we have grade systems that are all based on little letters. So all we want to kind of do is aim for like 85%. That's it. That's all we want to do. And we don't want to aim for perfection. We don't want to aim for the fact that we do it exactly right every single day. We just want to notice when we're getting on track to our change. And we want to try to aim for 85% of the way there, because there are times when life happens, and we need to be able to be flexible with ourselves and nice to ourselves, that stuff happens sometimes, and we might not be able to be on track 100% all of the time. All right, so now that's all about our integration and our capabilities. And so those are the 5 things that we are looking at when we look at our change process. So just as a review, I'm going to start at the very beginning. Slide track here. Okay, so we have a present state to our desired state, and we know that those two don't equate to each other. So we need to get our motivation in order towards and away from. And then we need to make sure that we understand what our beliefs and our meanings are. We need to make our decision, right? We need to make sure that we are on our decision, and making sure that we are looking at the things that are about our decision. So making sure that we're looking at reflecting on our actions, both reflection and action. And then we want to make sure that we dream, acting as if, making sure that we know all of the things about our dream. And then we are going on to our creation, where we are actually taking action and creating a strategy for our action. And then lastly, of course, our integration, where we're measuring our actions. Okay, so those are all of the steps that we're going to do in a change process. Now, here we go. The thing about it is that in a change process, there's a possibility, always a possibility, of being able to change. There's always possibility. And the thing about it is that for some, it's not necessarily easy, and it may not necessarily be quick. Though any change can occur, and especially if you follow the 5 steps, any change can occur. And so for me, it's one of those things that I love to make sure that when I'm working with somebody, that they understand that the change does not have to occur tomorrow, that changes can occur over a lifetime. So one of the things that I point out to people that in one of my programs is all about the fact that when we have changes, it's important to understand that we need to have different kinds of action steps for different kinds of changes that we're making in our lives. And so some of them need timelines and some of them do not. And so that's a really important thing to understand. So some people get really caught up in trying to make their changes on a timeline basis. And some changes don't actually need timelines at all. Now, we understand basically that the goal is to get back to the beginning, where our present state is our desired state. So we are no longer in the process of trying to change that. We have integrated into us. We have made that evolutionary or revolutionary change. And we are in a different place as a being. We have become something different. We have taken on new skill sets. We have challenged ourselves with new actions. We have measured those actions and we have come out in that change. And that's exactly what we want to be able to do in this world of changing, life changing with NLP. Now, these 5 steps are really super simple. And I've kind of explained everything that we can go through at this point in time from an NLP perspective with regards to change. Now, I do want to offer one thing though. For those of you who are wanting to kind of explore this in another way, we also have an availability, we also have an availability to look at the Raise Your Bar course. So the Raise Your Bar course is the one that I had designed, and it is 18 modules. It's all self-paced, and you can go on and basically go through this program and go through this entire change process. Not only just in one area of your life, you could do it for multiple areas of your life. And it guides you through with lots of different exercises, lots of different things that you can bring awareness to, but actually creating a strategic plan for yourself for change in your world. And I do this every year. I do it with my mastermind teams. In the past, I've done it with my clients, and it's a really great way to kick off your year, and especially with Chinese New Year just around the corner. Now, does anybody have any questions about the 5 steps of the change process? What NLP techniques we use at any of the changes, at the change steps? Anything else that anybody needs to know? Maybe they have a question about a specific change process that they want to go through themselves. Anyone? Anyone have questions? None today.
No, thanks. I think it was a really nice recap from the previous 2 sessions as well, and tying it nicely and adding some stuff. I think for me, it's coming up quite clearly now, just taking action.
Yes, that is the thing. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. Yes, and that really is it. And you know, for some people, I think one of the things that really stops people from taking change is actually going through more of a process like this that gives them more of a structure to a change process. And so sometimes people just sort of wing it and they just sort of go out and try to do it themselves. And I've seen lots of people do that, and that's typically why they end up in my office, because it didn't work. So, or they have absolutely no idea how to change their situation. That's another reason. So, so it's one of those things that I think it's just an amazing way, if you do it step by step, to create a very, very long lasting change in your life. And I've seen it happen so many times, not just in my own life, but in lives of people that I have coached or in my courses. And it's just amazing to see transformation. So, it's a beautiful thing when you see evolutionary or even sometimes revolutionary transformation in people as they really change who they are as people and what they are bringing to the world as far as a purpose and a mission. So it's really, really awesome.
I really liked the emphasis you put as well on the dreaming, and really taking the time to dream and then thinking about the how. Because I find even with NLP and everything I've done, sometimes I get caught to the how, and then you limit yourself before you even start. So I think it was a good reminder to really distinguish the two steps, and really being clear about what you would want.
Yeah.
In a dream state.
Yeah.
Or in a dream situation. So I think it was a really great reminder for me as well, to really take the time to be clear. And I think that's why I'm at the moment sometimes where I feel so many ideas, and actually streaming it to, okay, what is it when it comes down to it? What is it that I really, really want? And being crystal clear, because otherwise I think it's difficult to get there if you and you don't know at the same time. So
right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And this is one of the things that I think is super important. As you said, Cecile, it's people forget the dreaming part. They get caught up potentially in the how process, and they forget that dreaming part. And it's really, really crucial, because I know that since I have been doing this in my own life, because I've been doing this process through my own program, Raise Your Bar, for 8 years now, and it has really changed how I look at what is possible for me, and actually more important is actually what is important to me, and the things that have year by year been on that list of what is of the dream, and what has eventually come off that list as part of my dreams. And it's really helped me with clarity about what really is important as far as me and the dreams that I have for what I want to change in my world and accomplish in my world. And that process is invaluable. It's just so precious. And it's only after I have that set that then I go to the next stage of looking at action and looking at strategy. I 100% separate them. And not only do I 100% separate them, I often separate them by days. So I often don't even do them on the same day. Dreaming time is for dreaming time, and action planning is a completely separate task and thing I do differently. It often it also for me is a very unique and individual state of mind. So just like we would do in a Disney planning process of an NLP technique, that state to be in when you're in dreaming mode is super crucial, as well as obviously the state for reality of the realist, and to be able to create this strategy. Cool. Any other comments or questions about anything that you've learned in the Life Changes with NLP program? Anything that you want to hear about in the future? Also, cool. Well, if anybody has any suggestions about something they'd like to learn about from an NLP side, please let me know. I have some ideas for some future talks in March and April, May, and June. And so please let me know if anybody has anything that they would like covered and looked into. that would be
I
fantastic.
know I would love, and I don't know on which angle, and I haven't thought about it, but as you ask, I would
Yeah.
love something around strategy. I know it's always something I felt that I could go deeper into it. And I think something around strategy, the thought model, or just something around there, I would find it personally quite interesting.
Awesome. Awesome. I will look.
Thanks again.
Yay. Perfect. I think I have exactly the thing for that. Anyone else have something that they want to explore or anything that they want to share?
May I just share something?
Sure. Go ahead, Darren.
I think for the last 3 days, I always enjoy your lessons as usual. um, I would say in this world we don't. I think there's enough strategies and around in this world already. But I think I think we should bring back to really on basic on what is the initial the core start, because there's enough changes. I think you type of Google, I think you give you 1,001 strategy, or but strategy is after a strategy. But what's the core motivational changes that affect the strategy and actions? So I enjoy it and do maintain this value, and I appreciate it. That's my feedback to you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Yes, the motivation, it begins it all. Without it, and that's a very good place to explore. And there's a lot of people that don't make changes in their lives because of the fact that is a place that they're stuck. So lots of times that happens oftentimes in addiction, and people that have behaviors that they've either modeled from people throughout their lives, or have gotten just really good at, like anxiety or depression or other kinds of these states that people get into. Sometimes the change process is extremely hard for them because the motivation really isn't there to do it. And there might be some underlying causes for that motivation not being there. And so that's why we always start in that place. So yes, thank you very much, Darren.
Hi, Lily. I think probably two questions.
Yes.
Okay, first thing is that okay, after we go through all these steps, right? We have got this dreaming state and also what SE framing kind of thing. So all this, I think, is like more of setting up the foundation towards the motivation. But at the end of the day, whether we successfully make the change or not, it really depends on the actions that we take, right? So in terms of a proportion of time, or rather attention being put across like these different stages, is there like some kind of rule of thumb, or like how do we ensure we don't spend too much time in the thinking stage and then not move on to the action and the strategy aspect? How do we actually make ourselves make sure that we progress?
Yeah,
that's the first question.
That's a very good point. A very good point, Cami. So the thing about the thinking part, the reflecting part, dreaming part, is that there's an end to it, right? So we are going to dream, we're going to reflect, but we're not going to analyze. So we're not going to dig into like, why do we want that dream, or why it's just about the what kind of change do we want? What would it look like, sound like, feel like to have that change? All of those kinds of things we would be looking at. And once we have those, then it's time to start looking at how do we do it. So the thing about when we're doing that reflection process, if we go to that next step where we look at how could we do it, we're not taking action now. How could we do it? So one of the things that they've noticed in people who make changes, that they actually spend 1 week prepping for the change, right? So they haven't actually taken any action, but they're thinking about the things that they could be doing for changing. So for example, there's a group of people that help people to change their diets. And so for 1 week, what they do is they have the people take note of all of the things that they're eating during the day. And so for the first couple of days, they're just taking notes, like, are you eating cheeseburgers? Are you eating French fries? Are you eating, are you eating hawker stall food? Are you eating, what is it that you're eating? What is it that you really enjoy to eat? And then what we need to have, that what the person does then is, now they're going to just explore what options could they eat instead that would still meet that same craving or satisfaction, right? So let's say that they're really big pizza eaters, right? So how can they get a pizza without all the fat and calories? And so what they want to do is they want that person going and exploring all sorts of like recipes for pizzas, different pizza styles, different kinds of things. What ingredients are the lowest calorie intake on a thing, all of these kinds of stuff, right? What they're doing is just, I want them to notice all of those things. I want them to take take stock of everything that's in their refrigerator and their pantry and just write everything down. And then write down the things they wouldn't buy anymore. So which ones would they not buy anymore? Again, we're not taking any action, but just for a week, we're thinking about those changes that we could be making, the reflection part. And we're going to do it just for a week. And then the week that we start the action, we're going to take baby steps. We're just going to make 1 or 2 changes towards what we want to do. Right? So every day we're going to make 1 change, right? So it might be having a salad, or it might be going on a walk, or it might be, whatever it is that we're doing, we're just going to make that 1 change, but we're going to make consistently for 1 week, we're going to make 1 change a day, right? And then the next week we're going to make changes every single day, but we might be making more than 1 change a day, or we're trying to get those changes that we've made before consistent. So we're still taking action, right? And so typically it's very helpful to spend at least 1 week in preparation of change, in that thinking, reflection kind of thing, where you're really thinking about how the change is going to happen before the change ever happens. So that's the internal versus external. So I'm going to think about what I want, make those dreams and things like that. Then how do I actually make it happen externally in my environment? Where would I go shopping? Where would I eat lunch? Where would I do all of these kinds of things, right? That's how I'm going to look at it from an external perspective, but yet not yet taking action yet, right? Only when I have a strategy of what are those baby steps I'm going to take next week. What are those things going to be? What commitments, decisions can I make? And I'm going to make those decisions. I'm going to then go in and take action on those things. Then I'm going to notice my results. At the end of that 1 week, had I made 1 change every week or every day of that week? Were those baby step changes? How did they go? And do I feel closer to the change? Do I feel further away? Where am I? And so that's what we're going to do. So for me, when I work with people, I really truly believe in the foot and the door technique, where I make changes so slowly that the brain doesn't even know that it's happening, that it's just like the person, they sort of metamorphosize over like caterpillar kind of thing overnight. It's just, it's like week by week by week by week. And all of a sudden they're like, I don't even want to smoke anymore. And they just have no idea why they ever smoked in the first place, or why they ever ate really bad food, or why they ever really got into arguments with people. They just don't have any reason. And a lot of the times they are very confident they were always like that. And they don't really understand why they ever hired me in the first place. But their entire life has changed and they're like an entirely different person. And that's the point, right? They don't really remember what it's like to be the old them. That's evolution, right?
That means you're a very good coach.
So I always want them to feel as if I was never needed in the process. I know I was, but I want them to feel like that all of that change occurred under their own steam, because that's how it keeps going, right? That's how they feel completely capable of doing it themselves. When they get to that stage, I know I'm no longer needed at that stage, because they have completely taken it on board themselves. They don't need somebody to remind them, to ask them, to question them. They're completely on their own in that change process. And it's really fabulous. So step by step, I would just go think for at least a week, 1 week. I would not stretch it out any longer than 1 week, maybe 10 days maximum, 10 days maximum, but no longer than 10 days. And then, but during that 10 days though, when you're thinking and you're reflecting, or even that week, or that you're thinking and reflecting, what you want to make sure is that you're thinking about how it's going to happen the following week, what changes are going to be made, right? So I was working with a lady, it was actually during lockdown, and she had this really bad habit of ordering takeout during lockdown, and it just continued, and she had gained 20 kg during the original thing, and she was really sort of mortified about how big she was and things like this.
Wow.
And so what I wanted her to understand is that all we want to do is we want to just make one change, and that one change is every day making the change not to call the company to get the food. That's all we're trying to do is make that change. And I had her put a calendar on her wall. Actually, it was on her refrigerator next to her phone that she would use to call the delivery company. and basically every day that she didn't call, she wrote a big red X. And so all I asked her to do was to get as many red X's as she could. And then when she didn't get a red X, I wanted her to let me know when that was. And so when she did that, and she came in and she told me, like 7 days, and we went with there was a red X every day except for, the day 8, I didn't have a red X. And I said, okay, your only goal right now is to get 8 X's. So you got 7 in a row before. Now your only goal is to get 8. I just want you to hit your personal best. 8. That's it. And then feel free to call the guy after the 8th X. You on day 9, just feel free to call him. She wouldn't do it. She got her 8th X and she went 9 and 10 and 15 X's in a row before she hit the next one. And then she called me, she said, I had 15. And I said, and your goal is to get 16 in a row. That's all I want you to do, 16. That's it. Now, needless to say, by the time that she got to working on her 16th, she had already lost 5 kg. So pretty good. Yeah, so she starts seeing results, right? She starts noticing similarities, the change that she wants to have, losing weight, and the similarity, the number going down on the scale, right? Similarities. And the differences when the X's are not on the wall, the differences, right? That when she's not doing the thing that gets her closer to the goal. And she called me, or she sent me a text actually one day, and she said it was a Friday night and her husband and her had worked really late and they were both exhausted, and they came home and they had like 22 X's, and it was a Friday night and they did not want to cook. They did not have any energy to cook, but neither one of them wanted to miss the X. So they cooked. It was such a big game for both of them. They didn't want to miss the X. So they got their 23rd X of it. So
that's wonderful. Yeah, so my second question actually is probably more general in nature, because just now towards the end you mentioned something about dealing with anxiety and depression, right? So I mean, my understanding on this are more like a neurological kind of imbalance in the brain. So I'm wondering, NLP, does it really help in terms of dealing with this neurological or mental, I would say mental illnesses when it comes to making changes? And do we have any scientific science-backed kind of evidence? So
yeah.
such.
Yeah, we have a lot more information, Cami, about depression and anxiety now. So for example, NLP comes from the frame that no one can have anxiety or depression because they aren't actually things that you can own. So they are a way of mental being. So it's a way of actually processing information. So people sometimes like to say that there is a neurological deficit for people that have anxiety or depression. The thing is they can't prove when the deficit occurred. They don't know if the deficit occurred because the person has the mental program, or if it occurred before the person created the mental program. So that's the funny thing about anxiety and depression. So we always have anxiety and depression from a state of you've gotten really good at doing depression or depressing yourself. It's a verb, i.e. you have an action of doing it. And maybe they've never learned a way of not doing it, of doing something different. Like they might not have learned happiness. So for example, one of my clients who had a fairly large state of depression as measured by what we would call a PHQ-9 form, which is a psychological test for depression. So she had a situation where when I was working with her, she had cancer, and one of her desires was for the cancer to come back and kill her. So that's a pretty good, severe state of depression. Now, when we started talking about her depression, though, I found out that both her mother and her sister had tried to commit suicide, and her sister was actually successful. So she came from a family that everybody did depression really, really well. And that's what she grew up learning. She grew up learning how to do that. And so the thing that she didn't learn how to do was she didn't ever learn how to be happy. She did not learn how to use her brain in a different way. And so that's one of the things that we do in NLP, is to teach people how to use their brain in a different way. So depression, one of the things about depression that's interesting is that people who have depression use a very small portion of their brain, i.e. they're not using all of the different areas of their brain. So for example, they use very little of their motor cortex. They're very little of their prefrontal cortex. They're used mostly in the amygdala area, which is the emotional center of the brain. And
oh, okay. I think we're getting very deep, because then I've got more questions already about the different parts of the brain because of things to do with brain injury and all that. I think probably another section. Another section or something like.
But there's obviously, when we're talking about things like that, that's not a mental, that's not injury, right? It's just that they're not using those portions of their brain. So you can teach people to use those portions of their brain, right? The thing about it is that they're not using those portions of their brain because they haven't been using them. So it's just like a muscle in your arm. If you don't actually use the muscle in your arm, then you lose the muscle in your arm or your muscles in your legs. It's the same in your brain. So we need to make sure that we use them. And so
how about things like schizophrenia? Would it be like treatable kind of thing?
Well, some people do treat schizophrenia with NLP.
Really?
Yep, because schizophrenia is by definition, from an NLP perspective, a understanding of what is real and not real. So the reality, they have a reality strategy, and the reality strategy isn't based on a real map. They have a different map of what is real and what is not real, versus somebody who has a reality map that's correct. And so when you teach somebody with schizophrenia the difference between what is real and imagined, then they can follow that pattern. They've never been taught that pattern before. Yeah.
Okay.
So it is possible to treat people with schizophrenia with NLP successfully.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I can talk separately. Yeah.
Yeah.
Offline or something.
Yeah. And there's lots of different possibilities, right? Lots of learning disabilities have been treated very successfully with the NLP. Lots of things have been treated, and it's one of those things that it's about curiosity and understanding that the person might be using their brain in a different way, and that's okay. We just have to understand how that different way can be utilized for them to achieve the things that they want to achieve. So that's how we do that. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That got me really interested into this.
Yes,
This
and Cami, just a little thing about anxiety and depression. So with the research that's going on right now about anxiety and depression, they're looking more at things about your gut and your gut microbiome with regards to how it regulates things in your brain like anxiety and depression. So it's not just about what happens in the brain, it also is what happens in the rest of the body too.
Yeah, I think this is getting a more common topic that people talk about these days.
Yeah.
Especially COVID and locking out at home. Being locked out at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you, Cami, for your questions. So we will let everybody go, and I appreciate everybody coming to Life Changes with NLP, and look forward to seeing you in March when we have, February. Later in February, after Chinese New Year. Happy Chinese New Year, everyone. We'll see you in February and with a new topic. So we'll talk to you all then.
Thank you very much, Lindy.
Have a good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.